I'm the owner of Liberated Elephant. I do enterprise and team agile coaching, training, speaking, facilitating, and individual coaching for leaders and whoever needs it, I guess. And my intention today with you is to evaluate when to estimate stories, when it's helpful for teams and when it's not, and to also talk about some of the pitfalls that people get into. So let's see. So this is my personal journey with estimating. I started as a conventional project manager and became a Scrum Master and then an Agile coach. That's sort of been the path I've gone on. And I was a die-hard, we must estimate person. And I was at a conference in St. Louis called Agile Midwest. Highly recommend it, as well as Music City Agile, if you're looking for a good conference. But Agile Midwest, I was there and I was talking with somebody and had this really heated debate with somebody who was absolutely no estimates. We never need them. They add no value. And that's essentially what the no estimates movement is about, that estimating itself adds no value to your end product. And that's true. It doesn't add any value to the end product, but it is really useful for teams. And this presentation is really about the balance between those two things. So we're going to start with a game. So write this down for yourself. How many items do you think are in the jar? And how long would it take you to string them onto a string, essentially? I have the jar here. So if you look at my video, you can see the jar and see it in relation to my hands, if that helps anyone. Here it is from the bottom. Here it is from the top. Okay. I can see some of you. So as you're writing down these ideas, if you'll give me a little thumbs up, that would be great.
I've got to do math now, huh?
Yeah. All right. All right, so what are some of the answers?
I put 50 and 10 minutes.
Okay.
200, I think 16 minutes.
I put 220, 12 minutes.
I said 200, and then I averaged about 5 seconds a bead, so about 15 minutes, give or take.
Okay, cool. What if I showed you the picture like this? How does that change your estimates?
They go smaller beads to take a whole lot longer.
Yeah. Here's the trick. And if you're looking at my video, what you see on the outside is this jar full of wooden beads. They look pretty reasonably sized, easy to grab a hold of. But tucked in the middle is a baggie full of little tiny beads. And that baggie full of little tiny beads, there's 168 of them. And then there's 288 wooden beads in here around the outside, for a total of 456 beads.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, did anybody get close to those numbers?
No.
No. Right? And here's the trick with that. When we get user stories or requirements or whatever you're getting about what people want to build, we have no idea what's in it. We just get this jar full of things and we're guessing. And humans, as a general rule of thumb, are terrible at estimating. Terrible at it. We're awful. Here's why. So the first thing to know is there's a planning fallacy at play. Planning fallacy is a phenomenon in which predictions about how much time will be needed to complete a future task display an optimism bias and underestimate the time needed. So we're just always wrong because of the planning fallacy. The optimism bias is a cognitive bias where one assumes they are unlikely to experience a negative event, right? So if you were, I think, Joseph, you said 15 seconds a bead was your guess?
5 seconds to bead.
5 seconds a bead? What if the bead fell out of your hand and rolled across the floor? Well, that bead's going to take longer, for sure, right? And beading is a quick thing, generally speaking, but writing code is not. And when you get into programs where other people have been coding, you then also have to dissect what it is they were doing once you got there. And generally speaking, we have no idea. It's all just a guess. And so you think it's going to go like this. I'm going to get on my bicycle and I'm going to go all the way to the flag. It's going to be no problem. But the reality is that you have all these obstacles that show up in the way, and we don't think about them when we're estimating. So what's the point? So if you're sizing stories, the real point is that your team feels confident in their plan. If you're in, I don't know how many people are here in Scrum. It's hard to see, but I can see a few faces. So raise your hand if you're doing some sort of Scrum or Agile. I got one. Okay, so in Scrum, you generally do your work in 2-week sprints, right? You commit to some work, you get it done in 2 weeks as a team. You commit to new work, you get it done in 2 weeks as a team, ideally. And at the beginning of that commitment, you're making some sort of plan, and you want to base your plan on what you've done in the past, because then at least you have empirical evidence. For example, if you were stringing beads and you'd had time to practice first, you'd have a sense of how long it takes you to string beads. Whereas right now, you're just guessing. You have no idea how long it takes to string beads, right? But here's the thing. Sizing isn't actually about forecasting. Sizing is about confidence building. That's it. And we use it for forecasting, and that's where we get off the rails. We'll get into some of that at the end of this presentation, but the goal in sizing is confidence. And you have to agree as a team, what is a size? So if you're using the Fibonacci scale, for example, or t-shirt sizes, your Fibonacci might be this story is a 3 and this story is a 5. 3 and a 5, I guess I should do. This story is a 3, this story is a 5, right? And everybody has to agree that's a 3, that's a 5. And you'll have your reasons for why that's true. But what if the team changes? What if one of your team members is gone and they were the expert on a specific type of coding language? What if there's a ton of bugs that suddenly come in during your sprint? That's going to change your confidence too, right? And your plan. So really, the thing to remember about sizing is it's about confidence building. So this is how teams develop. They go from shu to ha to ri. This is a concept that Agilists use pretty deeply. It comes out of Japan, and it essentially means follow the rule, break the rule, be the rule. Here's the analogy. When you first learned to drive, you put on your seatbelt, you had your hands at 10 and 2, you always turned your blinker on, you made full and complete stops at stop signs, right? As you went along, eventually you learned, well, if there's no cars coming, I can sort of do a rolling stop through a stop sign, or there's nobody else around, so I don't have to turn my blinker on right now to change lanes. Nobody's here. Who's here to see it, right? Now, maybe you tried that and you did a rolling stop through a stop sign and got T-boned. And so now you never do rolling stops again, right? But the blinker thing could be the other way, right? You turned on your blinker, you changed lanes, nothing happened. So now you don't turn on your blinker all the time. And that is about really understanding the breaking of the rules is where we understand why the rules exist. And that intrinsic understanding that happens shifts the way you interact with the rules. When you get to re is when you, have you ever driven home and don't remember getting there? You left work and you got home, but you have no idea what happened between work and home? That's re in driving. Your brain is already just sort of actively functioning and you don't have to really think about it. It becomes muscle memory, right? You'll find this happens in martial arts as well. They have patterns that they have to follow. They learn the patterns until it becomes muscle memory and they don't have to think about it anymore. And you don't really learn why those patterns exist in martial arts until you've had to spar with somebody, right? And then they make sense. It's a little bit like watched Karate Kid, either of the Karate Kids. It's a little bit like that motion of blocking that happened because he was taking off his jacket so many times, or waxing the car, depending on which generation you're in. right? So that's the idea about SHU, HA, and RE. Every individual goes through that when they're learning something. So does every team. So here's a team at SHU. So the team's new to each other. They're forming. They have limited or no empirical evidence. They have no idea how long it takes them to string the beads. They just know they have to do that, right? There may be a large or wide variety in stories. So you might have some stories that are really small and simple, and some stories that are really large, and no consistency among the stories. And they have a wide fluctuation in their say-do ratio. Say-do ratio is, this is what we said we were going to do, and this is what we actually did. So they just don't really know yet. It's all very new to them. So this is what you do if you're coaching or working with a team that is in this state. First, you teach them how to size, right? Then you get them to size and commit together. You start reviewing their say-do ratios as a metric of how healthy are we in this action. And you review averages, your overall average, your last 3, your best 3, and your worst 3. Oh, why do you think we need all of those averages?
Better idea of what to expect in the future.
Right. It gives you more information upon which to build a confident commitment, right? It also helps you figure out what to improve. Like if you have a really wide range, let's say your averages are changing every sprint, right? And you're finishing work, a whole bunch of work, and then finishing no work, and finishing a whole bunch of work, and finishing no work. That's a really common SHU level teams anti-pattern that says they're overcommitting. And you actually have to commit to less to level that out. And it's counterintuitive to most people, right? So that's what you do with a team at SHU. So let's take a little moment to talk about sizing. What is it really? These are the general scales that are used most of the time if you're in an Agile environment for sizing. So the bottom left one is the Fibonacci sequence. This is a deck of cards that comes from Mountain Goat software. There's a ton of them out there, but generally each one doubles on the one before it. So 1 + 2 = 3, 2 + 3 = 5. Making no assumptions that anybody has ever seen the Fibonacci sequence before, but that's the idea that, right? That you're doing an exponential increase as you go higher. The other option is to do sizing with t-shirt sizes, extra small to extra, extra large, and usually equating some number to them just so that you can do math. Because the math is where you get some of the statistical information or data-driven information for the team to be more confident. And then you have 2 options for estimation. One of them is called binning. In binning, you put things into a certain spot, right? And decide whether one is larger or smaller, and then you assign numbers to those spots. This is a really good way to create a baseline for a team. You give them a whole pile of stories, ideally printed, because then you can do it in person, and move things around and shuffle. And there's 2 rules. The first person picks one and decides where it goes on the scale of small to large. And then the second person gets 2 choices. They can either move the card that's up there, or they can take another card and put it up there in relation to that one. And then the other one is planning poker, which you may have seen. That's where the cards come into play, where you're looking at a story and you have a discussion about it, and you all decide what size it's going to be, and you make it secret, and you put it down flat. Now, why is that important, that secrecy, when you make your first initial, this is what size I think it is?
Because you don't want to influence anyone.
That's right. You don't want to influence anyone, and you don't want to be influenced by anyone. Go ahead and take your guess. And then you show all your numbers at the same time and have a discussion about the variance. And here's the trick with that. Stories or requirements are not intended to be perfect. They're intended to be good enough so that you can start coding, right? And they require the documentation that you want to have, but they also require a conversation and some amount of negotiation between the team and the business and amongst the team too, about how you're going to solve that problem. And the real meat in sizing is that discussion. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day what you sized it, because the stories are made up and the points don't matter. We've already talked about how bad we are at estimating. It doesn't really care what we call it, whether it's a 3 or an 8. What matters is that you all understand as a team what it takes to deliver that work, and you sort of agree about how big it is. And when I say how big it is, that includes size, effort, skill set, complexity, all of the things. And time is the least of it. You're working in 2-week chunks. So you we're not too bad at going, oh, I could finish that in 2 weeks, right? Our best timing is to say, I could finish that in 1 to 2 days. That's actually where our sweet spot is as a species for estimating. So that's some things to consider. Now, I have an exercise I want to share with you. Just have to find the page where you get to try this. So we're going to try it, but we don't have the ability to do breakouts. So we're going to try it all together. We're going to do it as a group effort. So this is a cat sizing exercise. The goal is to deliver cats. Let me find it again. There we go. So we're going to deliver cats. So I need one person to go first. These are the cats. We're going to bin them. You tell me where to move it. Anybody who wants to talk first.
Lion, bin 1.
Lion. Does that mean it goes, if we put it across this line, where does it go?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, large then. All the way to the right.
Okay. Give me a second. I have to refresh. There we go. Okay. It's not working. I was afraid of that. Hang tight.
That's all right. That's what my boss says about me too. You're not working.
There we go. Edit in browser. There we go. That's what I needed. All right. So the lion's going over to the large. So I need somebody else to pick another animal and tell me where it goes.
The Maine Coon, I can't quite, okay, mountain lion, cool. Yeah, I was gonna say I couldn't quite see the other cat. The Maine Coon should probably go all the way over to the left.
Okay. Remember, if you go next, you can move the cat, or you can select another cat to move. Anybody want to go third?
I say the black leopard goes next to the lion.
Next to it?
Yeah,
Here?
right there.
Perfect.
Mountain lion.
Maybe the cheetah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, maybe the cheetah next to the black leopard. I'm not sure, but somebody wants to move it, they can.
To the left?
There, right there.
Yep. Okay, great.
The mountain. So I get to move it. I can move it to the right of the cheetah, or anywhere.
Anywhere on the arrow.
I've seen that. I've seen a mountain lion at the Nashville Zoo here, so they're pretty darn big. And I'd say the cheetah, in between cheetah and black leopard.
Okay. Anybody want to take on the lynx?
Let's put it next to the Maine Coon.
Okay. Awesome. So you've just binned all these cats. And you all are using, it sounds like size, how big are they, as a metric. I have seen people do this exercise and use how much fur do they have and how dangerous they are as sizing metrics, right? But the next step is to give them a scale. So things that are Maine Coon sized, what size should they be?
They're the one on the Fibonacci.
A 1.
1. Do we have anybody who disagrees with that? Okay. How about the lynx? What size do you think they should be?
Should we do the extremes? Should we do
Sure.
the lion? I mean, if we get to choose the scale.
You totally do.
Well, I mean, if just a simple 1 to 10 scale, unless there's something else.
All right. Anybody disagree with that choice?
Are we doing the Fibonacci, right?
You're doing whatever scale you want.
Okay. I was just curious then.
Like, it's an extra large t-shirt.
Yeah, it's an extra large.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So given that would make the 1, what, an extra small?
Preemie.
Okay. Awesome. So what about, now that we have that range, what do you think the length should be?
A small.
Small. So maybe a 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Now you've got these 3 kind of clustered. Are any of them the same size?
Maybe not, or it depends on like how old it is.
Assuming adults and both the same gender, then maybe black leopard and mountain lion would probably be the closest in size, I would say.
Okay. So what would they be?
Yes, large.
Large.
And then the cheetah's a medium.
Medium. Okay. So we'll make this one
7.
8.
8.
Sure. And this one is a medium, maybe at a 5. So I have a bias towards Fibonacci scales. Sorry. Right. So you've got sort of an idea here. This is essentially binning. You've now binned these critters. Now, this is going to be important because we're going to go to step 2, which is planning poker. So I can see 5 of you. 4 of you, Jessica, Joseph, Ryan, and Megan. So I'm going to ask the 4 of you to play in. Oh, and Clayton. Thank you, Clayton. So I'm going to ask the 4 of you to play in, the 5 of you to play in, and just use your hands when we get to planning poker, because we're only going up to 10. That'll make this easy. Right? So we're going to go to round 2. Now we've got 3 cats. If anybody needs me to go back to round 1 to show that, let me know. So now we've got a puma. Think in your mind for a moment what size you think that is related to the scale, and then on the count of 3, show me the number of fingers you think that is. Okay? Ready?
Oh, quick question.
Yeah.
What can I do, like in between digits that we did not choose, or must we choose only the digits we?
Given our technological limitations, I'm going to ask that we do just the digits that are up there.
Okay.
You would have that conversation as a team in person, but know that for the case of this experience, let's just stick to the numbers that you guys picked.
In that case, can we go back real quick so I can write those numbers down?
Sure can.
Thank you.
We had 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So let's talk about the puma. Everybody ready to show me a number? Okay. On your mark, get set, go. All right, I can't see both your hands, Jessica.
Sorry.
Just one hand. So I got a 3, an 8, a 5, an 8, and a 5. Now we would have a discussion. Why is it a 3? Let's go back here. A 3 would be lynx sized, a 5 would be cheetah sized, an 8 would be black leopard and mountain lion sized. Who wants to defend their number?
I was under the impression that mountain lions and pumas were related in some way. Like I thought a mountain lion and a puma were essentially, and I could be wrong on this, but I thought they were the same cat. They were just different names.
Yeah, but one has shoes. Just kidding. I don't know.
I could be wrong on that, but that was my vague recollection of having heard that at some point.
I was kind of associating it more with the black leopard shape and size, so I still think that one might be a little bit smaller, so maybe, I don't know, but
Okay.
based on the last screen.
So I'd like to remind you as a team that you have a product owner in the room, that if you have questions about these cats, you can ask.
How much does this cat weigh?
So the assumption that a puma and a mountain lion are the same thing is accurate. They are the same, just 2 different names. They also go by a 3rd name of cougar.
Ah, I thought you could only find those on Broadway.
Wah, wah, wah.
Oh wow, that was good.
Awesome. So if we look back here, the mountain lion got sized in 8. We had some 8 guesses. How does everyone feel about an 8?
That was my guess, so I feel pretty good.
Sounds good.
Okay. So
Wait, sorry. Can you go back just to the
Sure.
scale real quick?
again,
Oh, okay. It was 8. All right. Yep. Okay.
all right. So this one is an 8 or a large. All right, let's try this again with the Siamese cat. Does everybody have an idea of their size? All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I got all ones. We don't even have to have a discussion about that. Great. And now let's do the white tiger. Everyone ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I got mostly 10s and 1 8. Megan, how do you feel about a 10? Okay, great. So that's about how this goes in the real world. That's sizing in a nutshell. Now, had we had breakout groups, I would have sent you all off to different teams, and you all would have had a different team to do this on. So let me explain about some of the things that you may or may not have experienced in this moment. So what often happens when we do this in a room full of a bunch of people and everybody gets grouped off is they add up all their numbers and they come out with dramatically different numbers. Everything from something in the 10s to something in the 100s, and they've added all their things up and it's all different. Well, the reason for that is it's relative to the animals, so how they perceive the animals. It's related to how what they decided to measure on. So like if dangerousness was your measurement, you might have put the tiger and the lion at like 80, right, instead of 10, where the Siamese cat would have been at like a half. Right? So they're loud, right? So you might also do vocalization, ones that make the most noises, ones that can purr. If it was doing on purring, nothing larger than a lynx can purr. So your scale would have been flipped. The Siamese cat would have been way over on the high side because they purr the loudest. So every team measures based on different information, based on their skill set and their knowledge, and every team sizes differently. So you can't compare sizes either. And that's really a tricky thing. Lots of leadership in most organizations are trying to do comparisons. Well, they finished 20 points and they only finished 10 points. Well, their work might have actually been the same from a time and effort perspective, but that's just the scale they're using. So you can't actually compare that way. That's often why it's beneficial to use the say-do ratio over the number of story points when you're looking at health of a team. Did they say they were going to do things, and then did they get them done? And how do we measure that? One of the hardest messages for organizations to hear, particularly for teams at SHU, because they're still figuring it out, is that they're overcommitting. They're doing too much because they think they can because of all that optimism bias, and they don't have enough data yet or awareness to rein themselves back in and really commit to things they can do with the things that they know. So let me take us back to our presentation. Okay, so what was that experience like for you? For those of you watching or those of you playing in?
Having worked on different, if I may jump in, having worked on different teams that have not utilized this type of thing, and seeing a lot of that over extending, not so much maybe because of that can do or early excitement, more because of if I don't commit to something, it's easier to just say yes, I'll do it, and then ask for forgiveness later and get beat up in a meeting later or whatever. I think this was a good thing, that especially if that supervisor or team lead is there with you, you can come to more of a consensus as opposed to setting unrealistic expectations.
Yep. Anybody else have an interesting aha out of this exercise?
I think it's really good with anything to like always follow agreed upon rules, I guess, that the team agrees with, like such as, hey, on 3 we're gonna reveal, just so that you don't accidentally like influence other people to change their mind. Because I know in the past, whenever I did work on Agile teams, like that would happen a lot. like, for instance, I was a brand new college grad, and I remember like looking at my, you know, most senior dev, and I'd be like, well, what are they gonna say? And then I would like change mine to fit whatever they did, because I felt like embarrassed or pressure that I thought something was a 10 and they thought it was a 1. So
Right.
I think it's nice to have those rules and stuff. So I like that.
Yeah. The other thing that happens is often you have teams with variances in skills. And for those more senior folks, their responsibility becomes educating, which means they actually have less time to deliver. And your less experienced people are really focused on delivery because they're learning. And so what happens when you have a senior person that says, oh, it's a 1, and a junior person that says, oh, it's a 10, is you really end up somewhere in the middle, because the senior person has to step back and slow down to get that other person's skill set up. Now, that doesn't happen in all environments. I worked in an environment where they really were, you know, they were still providing reward based on individual success and not on team success. And so individuals would hoard work that would help them show success. So those are some other factors that affect a team's ability to move out of shoe. Right? Any other thoughts on a new team?
I really like the rapidity of this. I talked to a friend of mine who worked at Amazon for a few years, and one of the problems that he said they would run into a lot is sort of in the discussion phase, you know, sitting there and noodling over and talking and talking and talking around an issue or something like that, far beyond the amount of time it would really take to actually solve the problem. So I do sort of like the enforced, you know, like, hey, on 3, we're going to do this, or hey, this is, we're sort of time boxing the amount of discussion that we're willing to allocate to this. And I think that's an important thing to do. And so I like some of the techniques and stuff that you demonstrated for being able to do that.
Cool. I think it's also important to size first, then discuss, and then size again. And we didn't do a whole lot of that, but we did have one of the cats, the Siamese cat, you all agreed on a 1. And the white tiger, most of you agreed on a 10. And it was just a, hey, that was, you said 8, are you okay with 10? And we didn't even have to have a discussion beyond that. But the Puma, where there was a lot of discussion, it was valuable to bring in your product owner and get more clarification. Right. Cool. All right, let's move on to Ha. So when I talk about Shu, Ha, and Ri, one of the things to remember is there's this transition phase as people are moving through both. It's literally like a stair step. So you have this moment after Shu where you pick your foot up and then step down on Ha, and you're not really all the way in Ha yet. So the first thing, there's also another modeling called Tuckman's team growth model. I think I've got that right. And it's the forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning model. Forming, storming, yeah. So at forming, you're all brand new, everybody's at Shu, right? At storming is often where you see Ha type behaviors. There's some friction going on in the team. There's some, you know, argument around, is it an 8 or a 5, right? And we're really dickering over things. And there's a little bit of like jostling for position that happens in this space too. And you're still developing sort of healthy tools for conflict. They have empirical data, right? A team at Ha has empirical data and is using it to make commitments. And they have a pretty good comfort zone with what they think something should be sized, and are still working on making their stories independent and small. What typically happens is the stories, you know, in the beginning, they're this wide range, big, little, we don't know how it is. And then they start to work with the product owner, and that collaboration with the product owner skinnies up their stories. There's an acronym that the Agile world uses called INVEST, which is independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. And the 2 that are really weakest for a team at Ha is independent and small. And independent means it can't be delivered by itself. It has some other dependency before it can be delivered. And small means it's tiny, right? If you're using the Fibonacci scale, right, the goal is to get your stories generally around a 2 or a 3, really tiny, right? Something that you could get done in a day or 2 is another way to look at that. And all of them getting there, so that where you're really like dickering, is this a 2-day thing or a 3-day thing? Is this a 2 or a 3? Is this a, you know, that kind of thing? you start to see that it's no longer adding value to talk about the size, is what happens when everything is sized the same, which means getting really good at slicing. I don't have the link for it in here, but there's if you type in Agile for All story slicing in Google, you'll find a really beautiful diagram about how to split stories. Might be story splitting. How to split stories when this is a new thing. But teams at HA, that's the guidance they need. They need to keep sizing because they're still building confidence and getting to that place of equilibrium. But they're really focused here is on getting stories sliced small and independent. Any questions or thoughts about that? Okay. So what happens at RE? So when you get a team at RE, it starts to really chug along. They've probably dealt with most of their friction, or the friction is really low, and they have super healthy conflict models. Their productivity and predictability have stabilized, so they're starting to get like a consistent, this is how many stories we get done every sprint, either by count or story size, whichever way they've chosen to do that. Their say-do ratio is at 80% or higher, right? Every sprint, not just sometimes. And most of the time, if you've got a team at RE, you're looking at 90 to 95%, and occasionally 100 thrown in there, right? And their sizing and planning are fast and effective. So Scrum recommends 2 hours of planning per week of sprint. So that means 4 hours of planning for a 2-week sprint. That includes refinement of the backlog and sizing. When you get to a team at RE, they don't need that much time. At that point, they know each other, they know what they're capable of, they're seeing evidence of their ability. So you'll notice those things really shrink down, and they're like, well, we've got another hour to go in this planning meeting. Is there anything else for us to talk about? And this is, as a coach, one of the things I coach them to is to stop trying to use up their time and to let themselves stop. If they're finished at an hour, let them be done at an hour. Keep the block because it also gives them sacred time in their calendar, but leave the meeting when you're done. That's that intentionality around meetings that we were talking about at the beginning. Now, there's no reason to suggest that they drop sizing. If it gives them comfort and they feel good sizing, let them size. But if they're looking at it and they really feel like, hey, this is a waste of time, do we really need to size? You have a couple of options. One, you can just say, no, you don't need to size. And if the whole team's on board, you let them drop it. But usually you'll have some people who are like, no, this is the thing we have to do. And you have some people who are like, oh, it's a waste of our time. Why are we bothering, right? And you get this sort of friction that happens around the process. At that moment, you can look at the team and say, let's do an A/B test. Let's keep sizing. And let's also try counting how many things we get done. And that's really the movement that happens. You go away from a Scrum style sizing measurement to a Kanban style counting measurement. Because everything's really small and similar, then you can count now because they're small and similar. Any thoughts here or questions here?
Yeah, so the teams that are actually within our org way back in the day, we were like Agile Scrum type setup. And then our team went through this period where we were in RE, I would say. And that's when we decided to move to more of a Kanban methodology. But over the past like couple years, as the teams have expanded and new people have joined, I don't think that we like really operate in RE. Like, I don't think we're able to, but we've still maintained the Kanban methodology of doing things. And I don't know, I think this is a good kind of like wake up call that we maybe need to revisit, you know, how we do things. And like, eventually we could probably get back to RE, but we kind of within the teams need to like reevaluate and like take one step back.
So every single time you add or lose a team member, you start back at SHU because you're not the same team you were before.
Yeah, we like rotate. We have like small breakups of like, so let's just say there's 100 people and we have like little sub teams, and we like move people and we add new people and things like that. So
yeah,
I think that's a detail that we've maybe forgotten.
Yeah, it takes at least, so if you've got a really good system for forming the team, It can take 3 months to get them to normalization, which means they're now moving into ha and maybe re, right? But if you don't have a system for forming a team, it can take 6 months to get a team there. It's about 3 to 6 months, sometimes 9, sometimes never, if you have no intentional formation happening. And once you get a team together, you really want to leave them together for at least 18 months, because that's where you get the most out of that team. And there's data that backs that. Essentially, you want your team sizes to be roughly 5 to 9. And once they're in norming, they stay pretty norming and into performing for quite a while. And around 18 months-ish, give or take, they start to get complacent and forget to be intentional about their practice. So you can either infuse them with an outside observer, like a coach, or a senior level scrum master, or some leader in the organization who's pretty good at coaching, and infuse them with some observational information that instigates them to change. You can shift their work so they have to start over and think about new goals, or you can shift the team. So those are some things to consider from a team forming perspective. But team formation should be an intentional practice, and then you should leave them the heck alone once they get there. And most organizations don't do that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts about Shu Ha Ri? Because I do want to move into the challenges with sizing around forecasting, which is what most organizations use it with.
I just have a quick question, Jessica. You mentioned A/B testing. I'm talking about like basically conflicts you're having between the team members between sizing and counting. Is that Agile terminology, or is that?
No, I totally stole that from the technology.
What is it? So what is it?
I stole that from coders. So they do A/B testing. When you deliver software, you can do A/B testing and turn a certain subset of your population on to one UX, and another subset of your population stays on the old UX, and you get to see how they interact with it. This is essentially the same kind of thing. It's A/B testing with data. So you do, here's the story points, here's the counts. What are we seeing over time? Do the story points really matter, or are the counts going to be good enough? And that gives them a way to see both metrics next to each other, so that the people that are resistant to letting go of sizing can decide if it's actually okay. Lets them hold their comfort zone while looking at something that's scary.
So it's like control group versus test group or something.
You got it, except it's data. It's control data and test data, right? And the whole thing in Agile really is around experimenting. Everything's an experiment. So the hypothesis would be, we hypothesize that we could count stories and get the same kind of information that we need to make confident commitments. And then to prove that, we're going to look at counts next to story points and see if that's true. And if it turns out false, we're going to try something else. And if it turns out true, we're going to switch to counting, right? It's very experimental type language, scientific type language you can use around that. And my experience is that people in the tech industry like that scientific language. Right.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Sure thing. Okay, so the trouble with forecasting. When you first see a problem, like our jar of beads, you know the very least about it, right? The first time you see a requirement, you're guessing how big it is, you are between 0.25 times off to 4 times off. So the smaller it is, the less impact that cone of uncertainty has. And the closer you get to done, the more accurate you are. When's the only time you know how long a project will take?
When you're done.
When you're done. That's it. That's the only time you know how long a project will take, because of all those unplanned and unexpected things that show up. So here's how we usually forecast. We say, and this is all made up data, this is not a real team. I just, pulled it out of my head. But it's kind of related to what I've seen in the world. So this would be like here in the early sprints, this was a new team. They were kind of all over the place. You can see that anti-pattern that we're talking about, right? Where things are going up and down. And they've got story points going on along. And by this point, sprint 16, 17, and 18, we estimate we're going to take their last 3 average, because that's what they're doing right now. And we're going to estimate that they're going to do 17 story points every sprint going on. Well, the fallacy with that is that they have a standard deviation of 4 if they're counting things, and a standard deviation of 9 if they're counting story points, which means there could be a big spread of things that are going wrong. So I've got a math problem for you. Get your piece of paper and pen out. Here's your math problem. If we had 150 items and 350 story points in our backlog with sprints of 2 weeks, when would we be done? How many sprints? Anybody got a math guess yet?
Going by what the averages for what they're saying for the 16, 17, 18, I've got anywhere from 16 to 18 weeks. If you go by the low end is 16 would be by point or items, and the high is the 18 for the points.
Okay, Ken, so when I do the math and I just do it by sprints, it's like 8 point something something is the math. Can we have partial sprints? No.
No.
9 sprints if you're going by count, right? And 10 sprints if you're going by story points. So what would you tell your business or product owner in this case?
Anywhere from 5 to 6 months.
Anywhere from 5 to 6 months. Cool. Now, most of the time, they'll look at you and go, but tell me exactly. And so you'd say 9 to 10 sprints, maybe, right? Here's how we should be forecasting. So now I've used the same base data and I just took the last few sprints and we've subtracted in the standard deviation for worst case, and we've added in the standard deviation for best case. Now, teams won't get better forever, right? They just, at some point, they will baseline and they won't get better forever. But this is a way to do it. This is a short, quick and dirty, I'm not a statistician, Monte Carlo diagram is what you're looking at here, right? If we followed the best case, the gray line, it would go up like this by number of items. If we followed the most likely, it would continue on like it's been. And the worst case would mean it would drop down here and we would be out of the ability to continue somewhere around 10. Now, keep in mind that this does happen if you have high amounts of technical debt that gum up your system, or if you don't have any like continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated testing practices, things can really grind to a halt very quickly. So, so that's worth showing people, right? Well, why have we ever been, the times we were the worst, what was happening at that time, right? And same thing with number of story points. At some point, it's gonna track down. So now we have the same question. Now, given that we're looking at more information, what are the ranges you could tell them? Any guesses? No?
Seems like the most likely case is like 18 weeks.
Yeah, that seems like the most likely case. That's right. That's the most likely case. But the best case could be, if we were going by story points, the best case is 7 sprints, which is 14 weeks. And the worst case by item count is the highest one, is 22 sprints, which is 44 weeks. Right? So that's like 11 months. And that's the real range. And telling your business or product owner that information is way more important than going, well, it's probably 9 or 10 sprints, right? Because there's always going to be something you don't know. And it is better to give them all that information that says, hey, listen, based on our empirical data, our worst case scenario is this takes 11 months. And our best case scenario is this takes 14 weeks, which is 6.5 months, right? And you should plan accordingly, or you should tell me what stories can I drop off the backlog if we get to 6 months and you need to deliver. And that's really how we should be forecasting. We should be using the data to have a conversation, not to tell people when it's done and then beat each other over the head when it's not done at those dates. Any questions about that? Okay, so here's the sum up slide. Use your story points and sizing to gain confidence. Let them go if they serve no value for you, and forecast ranges, not precise dates, for a more accurate picture. Cool. And we are at the end. This is me. We're also at the question and answer section. So if you have any questions, hit me up.
The name of your company? How did that come about?
Generally speaking, when we are, here's how I explain Agile coaching. When somebody asks me what Agile coaching is and they have no idea what Agile is and no idea what IT is, I say, listen, I help people get out of their own way so they can get stuff done. And often when we are struggling, the elephant in the room is ourselves and not anybody else. And so this is all about turning those challenges into opportunities for movement and growth.
Can you go back one slide if everyone has like what they need off this one? I just wanted to see like
this one?
Yeah.
I don't know who made that cute little icon, but I liked it.
Yeah, I think something that like we've encountered a lot on the teams I've been working with is like, well, given that we kind of moved away from strict Agile and we're kind of doing this Kanban type thing, I don't know if like, because we don't really do sizing, we talk about how long we we think something's going to take, and it's usually, I don't know, it's a pretty, like, it's just a guess. And then, but we still are asked from like stakeholders or products, like precise dates, like precise dates get asked, oh, well, so you can do this by then or by then.
Yep.
And I don't know, that always like bothers me, but I think it's just a sign that like maybe we need to like take a step back and maybe go back to actually like sizing and trying to get a more accurate view of things. Like we do focus on breaking tasks down so that they are supposed to be around the same size, but I don't know, we have such like variance in, experience and skills on teams that even that is like really, really hard.
All right, so here's some things to know. One, Kanban is a type of Agile. Agile is an umbrella term that includes Scrum, Kanban, Lean, XP, test-driven development, user story mapping, UX, design-driven development. All of that falls under the Agile umbrella. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is that you can get really good data out of Kanban. Here's the data you want to look for. Are you ready with your pen? Okay, so the data you want to find is lead time and cycle time. Lead time is when did we hear about a problem till when did we finish? And cycle is when did we start fixing it to when did we finish? And then the other thing you want to do is how long does everything take in each column? So that you can start to tell people, well, once it gets to this point, we're here, right? Those averages, that lead time and cycle time, you can do, again, your best 3, worst 3, last 3. And since it's things, you might do a bigger spread. You might do best 6, worst 6, last 6, something like that. So you get a slightly more statistical sampling. And use that information instead to say, well, you've asked for this, and our average, our best, worst, and most likely averages are these. And so it will be done sometime in this range since you asked for it today. Once we start it, then we can give you a new update. And from there, this is our range. And we have this one column where we're waiting for user testing that always slows us down, or whatever it is you're waiting for, right? Waiting for user testing, waiting for code integration, something like that, right? This always slows us down, and we know sometimes we get stuck in this column for many days, and that could slow down the delivery of this solution, right? And those are all the ways you can have that conversation, so it's a more accurate, transparent representation of what's true, right? And incidentally, if it's user testing and it's the user bugging you to get it done, now you have a whole new conversation with them. Listen, where we slow down is here. All of our other columns, we finish in a day or 2, and then we sit in user testing for 2 weeks. Do you want to help us get this done faster? Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, there's maybe an opportunity too to do maybe a hybrid between the two with Kanban, where you could still maybe associate a more simplistic sizing model with the tickets as well, where maybe you just do small, medium, large, right? And then you could even track a little bit more granularly. Here's how long we estimate a small Kanban task would take once it's in each stage versus a medium or a large. And you still don't necessarily have to go and sit down and plan out exactly your scale, how many hours, how many days, whatever you think it's going to be. But just generally, I know that's going to be a really long task, kind of a couple-day task, or I can get that done today.
That hybrid in Agile is called Scrumban, and there's a whole book on it if you want to learn more about it. Cool. I'm going to slide back over. Any other questions?
If a team is looking to implement Agile for the first time, do you have any recommendations on, outside of some of the items that you mentioned here, any other recommendations on books that would be of benefit, or materials, things like that, that would be really good to help foster that mentality across, yeah, like I said, across the team?
Sure. My favorite one is hire a coach, but I'm a coach, so there's a little bit of bias there. Other resources, there's a book, if you're going with Scrum, there's a book called Essential Scrum by Ken Rubin that I recommend. I really like his book because he spends some time talking about the financial trade-offs of decisions, and that can really help change the conversation with your business. And it's useful for an engineering team to start thinking about the impacts of their choices on the financial bottom line. The ability to be able, as an engineering person, to be able to talk in business language will go so far to helping the negotiation. Like, we want to refactor this code. It's going to take us an extra day. We're going to put this technical debt into our sprint. It's going to take us an extra day, and it's going to take away this other story that you wanted to get done. And they look at you and go, well, why do we have to refactor? That's not a priority. You can look at them and go, if you want me to continue going at this speed, I have to do this refactoring, right? That this is a matter of speed to delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to have that conversation is really useful. And Essential Scrum does a lot of that, like really shifts the way you think about code delivery so that those conversations are easier. Another book, Another book I'd recommend if you would prefer Lean is Lean Startup by Eric Ries, R-I-E-S, I think. I think I'm spelling that right. And both, and there is also, if you search Kanban or Scrumban, there's like the two top books that show up under either of those searches on Amazon are the other two I'd recommend. There's also a, I have it sitting right here, okay, I don't have it. There's one called the Quick Start Guide to Kanban or something like that. And that one's a nice little, like, really short book that's useful for Kanban. What you will find in all of those books is a deep and repetitive seeding in the mindset of Agile. And what we're really talking about is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So it's great that you want to use Kanban or use Scrum, but what's more important is how does it work for the team? If they're not being drawn to Kanban, but they're being drawn to Scrum, well then try some Scrum, throw it in. You know, a team moving through that process, like they'll generally like pick a process and like, we're going to do Scrum, and they get real, particular about it. We're going to do Scrum and only Scrum. And then they start to find that Scrum doesn't fit every scenario for them, and they'll start to shift their practices. And that's okay. That's normal growth of a team.
Yeah, like I said, whenever our team was a lot smaller a few years ago, we were a more like, we did the 2-week sprints and things like that. And like once we got to, I guess, we were in the norming phase, and we really, a lot of the people's skill sets started, growing and kind of evening out in certain ways. And we really started operating in the and then that's when it was great. Like we decided to move towards Kanban, and we kind of like modified it to fit, our work and our company and things like that. And it was honestly really, really good. So I'm happy to have like experienced that movement. And now I think taking a step back and realizing that maybe the landscape's different and that we need to maybe move back to a more strict setup would probably be a good change for some of our teams.
Cool. Come back and see faces again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Jessica, I've got a question,
Sure.
A comment and a question. I guess the comment first is, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is just maintaining communication.
Totally.
It's not just, here's what we need. Okay, we'll do it in this amount of time. Talk to you in 8 weeks. It's constant reevaluation and communication about this is where we're at and everything. So that's interesting to me. It boils down to just talking to people.
Totally.
Yeah. What a concept, right?
Right.
The other thing is, have you seen Agile, or have you experienced in your business or in other experience, Agile being used in other industries like manufacturing or anything? Or is it strictly software development?
Actually, Agile came out of manufacturing. It started there. The Toyota Motor Company in Japan started it with Lean. And so the Kaizen concepts and Kanban and all the Japanese words, the Shuhari, that all started out of Lean. The Agile Manifesto wasn't created until 2001. And before that was all the UML, Scrum, So if you run into somebody who's like 50 or 60 and you're like talking about this new Agile thing, they're like, yeah, we were doing that already before Agile was called Agile, right? They were Agile before Agile was cool. So, so this has been going on for a really, really long time. The Agile Manifesto was created in 2001, and we've had movement happening since then. The big movement that's happened in the last 3 to 5 years, I want to say, is business agility. And so now Agile is being applied to marketing and sales, to HR, to finance. If you're interested in some of those extended learnings, another book I'd recommend is Implementing Beyond Budgeting, which is all about Agile finance. And then there's another book here. This one I do have handy, Agile Business by Bob Gower. Is another one I'd recommend if you want to think about those other avenues. The idea being that, Agile is really a customer first idea. So let's say if you were applying it to HR, their customer, or people operations as it's getting called these days, their customer is all the employees. And their value stream is all the way from recruitment till a person leaving the company, and how to make each one of those steps an excellent experience for their customer, the employee, potential employee, or former employee, is really what Agile is about for them. And it shifts the way we think about people away from an HR system that's protecting the company from litigation to an HR system that is supporting the employees for delivery. So they're showing up all over the place. It's in all kinds of industries.
That's interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Sweet. Well, if anyone, does anyone have any other questions for Jessica? It's weird saying, I feel like I'm speaking.
I know. I'm with you.
Yeah, sorry guys. Awesome. Well, thank you again for doing this. This is really like eye-opening and a really great refresher for me personally. And I was kind of chatting with some people too on Slack about it. And I think this is really helpful. And I'm happy that we have the recording, because I think sharing this with some of our teams here at Assurion will be really cool. So really appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. And I appreciate the change of venue. I think we all do. Welcome to social distancing.
Yeah, it's 2020. This is our new lives.
That's right. That's right.
Sweet. Well, I guess it is time for the giveaway.